Greetings from the Tech Cave, Fenris here, and today we are in a different filming location because, unfortunately, this next system is so large that I can't physically film it on the desk. And that system is the Colecovision. Now, for those that don't know what this is, the Colecovision is a system that was released in 1982 specifically to compete with both the Atari 2600 as well as the Mattel Intellivision. And if you ask me, out of those three systems, this is my favorite one of the era, mainly because this felt really close to like the NES style of graphics as well as gameplay. But unfortunately, because it was released in 1982, it became a victim of the American console crash of 1983. So, that out of the way though, this system was sent my way by my good friend Triforce over at My Life in Gaming, and he brought it to my attention because he was having some issues with it, mainly with the RGB video that it's already been modded with. So, he sent it my way, so that way I could take a look at it and install a fresh, new RGB mod to it. So let's not waste any time and let's tear this system down. Alright, so now that we got the top off, we can see that there's not really much to the Colecovision. The power connector is over here, the actual hardware is on the right, and on the left is just a bunch of empty space for the controller caddies. And unfortunately, it does look like that the connector here is epoxied on, so I can't just simply disconnect it from the physical case, so I will have to work with it still in the case. But that being said, considering how this is the only workable area here, it shouldn't be any problem to return to the desk setup. Now, with that out of the way though, we are going to remove the screws that are holding the shielding in place, so that way we could take a look inside and see what we're working with. So without further delay, let's get to it. Okay, so I've went ahead and cut out the little sleeving here that was protecting the mod board, mainly because I was curious to take a look at it. And yeah, as you can see, this is quite the mod work, to say the least. Now, I know exactly who modded this system, but I'm not going to call them out because this is a rather old mod board, and perhaps their skills have improved since then. And I doubt that they're using this exact circuit to do ColecoVision RGB mod these days. But needless to say, yeah, this definitely could use some work. So I'm going to go ahead and remove as much as I can from the main board that's attaching this mod board to it, and as well as just removing the mod board itself. Now, unfortunately, because they epoxied the 8-pin mini DIN connector, I'm forced to reuse the wiring that they use, which it's fine. Like, the wiring isn't bad. It's just, unfortunately, it's not going to be so easy for me to just dislodge all the wires and then just restart from scratch. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and free this old mod and install the new one. Okay, so now that we got the old mod board removed, and I even went ahead and desoldered the shielding, we can now remove the main board from the rest of the case. So we could just Come over here, get the power port, and just set all this aside for later. And this will be our main point of focus. So before we install the new video mod, what I want to do is I want to go ahead and recap the entire Colecovision motherboard. And as you can see here, we have a total of 4 capacitors present. However, when we order the Colecovision cap kit from Console 5, you'll see that we have way more than 4 caps. So where's the rest of them? Well, I did a bit of close inspection and found they're all hidden under the RF module. So if we remove the top shielding here, as we can see, the RF module board is just being held down with what looks to be 6 solder blobs to the shielding here. So in order for us to get access to the rest of the caps, we need to remove this RF module board. So let's get to it. Okay, so it turns out there is more than just the 6 ground tabs. You also have a row of pins here that connect the RF board to the main board. You know, in hindsight, that should have been plainly obvious to me, but you know what? You live and you learn. So let's just go ahead and desolder these row of pins. Okay, sorry for the sudden jump cut, but I quickly realized as I was trying to pry the board out that I wasn't going to be able to film while trying to get the board out safely. So I had to stop filming just so that way I can concentrate on removing the RF board safely. So what I had to do in order to remove it, you saw I was using a plastic spudger. So what I did is I wedged this in and then pried it out until the edge of the board made it over the tab. From there, I made sure the spudger was in place while I came in with this other spudger and worked my way down here in order to get it pried up over these 2 tabs. Once you get it over this bottom row of tabs here, you can just kind of gently wiggle it out and remove it safely. Now, the reason why I had to do it like this is because there is an RF jack and a power switch here, or rather this is a channel selector switch, sorry, that is in the way, so you wouldn't have been able to do it from this side. So with that being said, we did manage to get the RF module board out of the way, and we have exposed the other 2 capacitors on the main board and a single capacitor on the RF board. So let's go ahead and start recapping. Alright, so first order of business is marking the capacitors. So I got my Sharpie ready. And what we're going to do is we're going to identify exactly where each of these capacitors are from the top and mark them on the bottom. Okay, so now that we got the capacitors all marked up, we can now go ahead and start flexing up the board and desoldering them. Now, something that I forgot to note when desoldering the RF board, when it comes to working with these Colecovision boards or Atari boards, you want to make sure that your iron and desoldering iron are set to 280 degrees Celsius at max. These are very fragile boards and it's really easy to lift pads on them. So you want to work with as low of temp as possible. And I find that 280 degrees Celsius is just the sweet spot for these older boards. So without further delay, let's get to work. Alright, so we got all the main board capacitors removed, and they're all the same type, 10 microfarad, 16 volt. So we're just going to go ahead and grab our 10 microfarad capacitors and place them on. Can't forget about the RF module itself. So we have one capacitor here, and it is a 10 microfarad 50 volt capacitor. So let's go ahead and get that replaced. Alright, so with all the capacitors replaced, we're going to go ahead and rebuild the RF modulator. Now, you may have noticed earlier that I ended up roasting one of the mounting pads, and this is exactly why I say you should operate at 280 degrees Celsius. I forgot to readjust my temperatures back to 280, and it was still set at 320, and I ended up roasting off the pads, so oops. But fortunately, the other 5 ground pads are still in place, so that's all fine and dandy. Now, the way that we're going to tackle this is we're going to actually work backwards. We're going to try to swing the RF port and the switch back into place while also kind of shimmying it and getting it lined up with the pin headers here. It's going to be a little difficult, and I may need to use the spudgers to help coax it back into place, but let's give it a shot. Okay, once again, had to do a jump cut. I apologize because just as it was difficult to remove the board, it was equally difficult putting it back in. So yeah, we did manage to get it in though without damaging anything. So that's good. But in hindsight, I probably should have just gone ahead and desoldered the whole RF module from underneath. But hey, you know what? Lessons for the future. So in any case, let's just go ahead and solder this up, and then we can move on to the next step, and that is the RGB mod. Alright, so we got the RF modulator board soldered in place. I even went ahead and scratched a little bit of the ground plane here so I can lock the 6th tab in place. So enough stalling. Let's go ahead, flip this board over, and install the TMS RGB. Now what I have here is the TMS RGB. This is an open source RGB mod for systems that use the TMS 9928A and TMS 9929A video display processors, or VDPs for short. Now this includes systems like the Colecovision, SG-1000, SC-3000, MSX, and so on and so forth. Now the way this works is by taking the YRY-BY signals that these VDPs output and converts it to RGBS. Now the concept of this mod isn't really anything new, as shown here with this old mod that was removed from the console, but the problem with these older mods is they required manual adjustment in order to dial in the color levels. But even with adjustments, older mods like this did not resolve the biggest issue with the conversion process, and that is a strong blue hue that often covered the entire image. Now, if you want the full story behind this issue, I highly recommend you check out the TMS RGB website for further details, linked in the description below. But all you need to know is this mod was made to rectify all the quirks that come from those older RGB conversion mods and outputs a nice clean signal for the systems that use the TMS 9928A or TMS 9929A VDPs. So with that aside, we will be installing this on the underside of the Colecovision, like so. And with that, we are going to take our soldering iron and solder it in. Alright, so as you can see, we have the TMS RGB installed, and it's really that simple. Just 8 solder points and you're good to go. But we're not out of the woods just yet, because now we need to address the bottom case. Or more specifically, the 8-pin mini DIN that's installed in our bottom case. Now, normally, I would install one of these. This is a small 8-pin mini DIN with a little breakout board that marks where to solder your wires for the different signals. But unfortunately, because this one is epoxy to the shell, I'm not able to do that. I mean, sure, I could take a hot air rework station to this and probably work it out, but there's also the risk of actually warping the shell, so I'd rather not take that risk. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some notes, and I'm going to buzz out exactly what signals each of these wires are, so that way I can just reference off of my notes when wiring up for RGB. So with that out of the way, let's get to taking notes. Okay, so while I was determining what wire went to what pin on the 8-pin mini DIN, I discovered something rather alarming. So if we take our blue wire here, which is actually our blue video, and our brown wire here, which is supposed to be C-Sync, you hear that? That's shorted. So it looks like the previous installer didn't even wire it correctly, because the blue video and the C-Sync signal are now shorting. So unfortunately, I will have to break down this 2-part epoxy in order to remove these wires and fix that bridge. So let's see what I can do. Okay, I'm sorry for going off camera on this, but I really needed to concentrate in order to make sure that I didn't accidentally burn or warp the plastic in any way. But basically, what I had to do is, with my hot air rework station set to 120 degrees Celsius, I had to constantly move around the epoxy until it eventually reached a melted state, so that way I could push the old DIN out and then come in with my clips here in order to cut out the rest. And while doing that, I was able to see exactly what went wrong. It's not going to capture well on camera. Actually, it might. But look how long those exposed wires are. It's no wonder why there was a dead short between, a dead short between Blue and C-Sync. They didn't size the wires correctly to make sure that it was equal to the pin size. So evidently, I don't even think that they properly tested this, because otherwise they would have seen as soon as they plugged a SCART cable in, this was going to be unstable. But you know what? We got it out of the system, so whatever. That just means that I wasted my time in trying to determine the wire pin out, but at least we can now come in with our 8-pin mini DIN. Just plug it in like so. Take our PCB like so, and then just solder it up. So with the replacement 8-pin mini DIN installed, we are now going to install our 6-ribbon conductor wire along these pads up here. And as well, we're going to be running a separate wire that's going to be soldered between pins 1 and 2. The reason why is because according to the XRGB Mini Framemeister's pinout, pins 1 and 2 of the DIN is audio left and audio right. And since the Colecovision only does mono audio, that means we are going to be running dual mono between both channels. So with that aside, let's get our wires soldered in. So with all of our conductors soldered in, we now need to lock this DIN connector in place. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm not going to use 2-part fixed epoxy like the previous modder did. Rather, I'm going to be using hot glue. And the reason why I'm going to be using hot glue is because hot glue can break down with just some 91% isopropyl alcohol. So I don't need to like pry at it with tools or whatever just to get it off. So all we need to do is just come in with our hot glue gun and hold the other side of the DIN. And we're just gonna spread a generous amount. That should do it. Make sure that it's straightened out. And we're just gonna let that set. And once it's set, we can now move on to the next step, which is installing the wires to the mod board. Okay, so as you can see, the glue has finally cured, so it's time to solder the wires to the Colecovision. Now, something I want to bring up real quick. So, the 6-conductor ribbon here is going to be soldered onto the 6 pads that correlate on the TMS RGB. However, for audio, we are actually going to be pulling it from C88. More specifically, the leftmost pad of C88. That's going to be our audio output signal, and if we look on the underside, that's going to be the right pad here. So just something I wanted to bring up real quick, just that way if you ever mod your ColecoVision for RGB output, you know where to grab audio. So with that out of the way, let's get to soldering some wires.
Alright, so we got the video wires installed, so all we need to do now is fold it over and solder on the audio wire. Now you might be wondering as to why I'm doing it from the side here rather than doing it from the top, as that would have resulted in a much shorter wire travel. And the reason why is, by the time that we take the board and install it back into the Colecovision, you'll see that there isn't really much space between the top of the board and the case. So unfortunately, I'm not able to route it that way. So unfortunately, the only option I have is to go from the side. But at the very least, we could try to make it as short as possible, and we have succeeded in just that. So now I'm going to attach the audio wire, and then we'll go ahead with testing. Okay, so we got the Colecovision all hooked up. I have it hooked up via RGB SCART to the RetroTing 5X. I got my copy of Donkey Kong installed, and I got both of the controllers that the unit came with plugged in as well. So we're going to flick on the power and see if it works. And look at that, we got an image right off the bat. So let's wait for the game to kind of load a bit. Any day now. There we go. So we are going to do 5, which is skill 1, 2 players. And we're just going to test these controllers. These controls are a little stiff. Like the analog stick, or I guess this is actually a digital stick, but oh crap. Yeah, these sticks are fine. Alright, let's try player 2. Yeah, I gotta like press real hard in order to activate the yeah, I gotta press real hard just to activate the jump buttons. But yeah, other than that, the unit does still work. So that's good. We have confirmed that the RGB mod works and the unit itself still works. So with that out of the way, what we're going to do is we're going to move forward with taking apart these controllers, because these controllers could use some work as well. So let's get to that. Okay, so just for the sake of making this a little easier on myself, I'm only going to take apart one controller for this video and clean the other one off camera. The process is the same across the board for either controller, so you're not really missing something from me doing both controllers. And it starts by removing 5 screws, with the 5th one hiding underneath the cord. So let's get the screwdriver and unscrew the controller. Okay, so once you got all the screws removed, you'll notice that the controller starts lifting up from the top shell. So all you need to do is just grab it and just carefully pull it back, and you're inside the controller. And the reason why you want to pull it back carefully is because you have these little plastic tines here that lock the controller from the bottom lip here. So with that, we just need to remove the PCB. And the controller wire is attached with these clips, which with the Atari 2600 controller is kind of the same. So we'll just kind of leave it like this and just clean around it. Okay, so let's start with the bigger problem with this controller, and that is these 2 buttons right here. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I was really struggling to get these buttons to activate whenever I was testing these controllers. And as you can see, these appear to be a spring-loaded momentary switch. So what we're going to do in terms of cleaning it is we're going to take some 91% alcohol in a needle bottle and just pour it inside the channels here. Now, alternatively, you can use electrical contact cleaner or deoxit, but this is just what I have in hand at the moment, so this is what I'm going to use. So we're just going to pour a generous amount in there and just cycle the button a few times. Do the same thing for the right button. And we'll just do it again for both, just to make sure we get it all worked in there. Perfect. Just come in with a cotton swab to soak up the excess. Looks like I actually might need 2 of them. All right, so we got these 2 buttons cleaned up. Now we just need to clean the rest of the controller. All right, and with that, the controller is ready for reassembly. Now, you may have noticed that I didn't bother cleaning the number pad, or rather underneath the number pad, I should say. And the reason why is because this is literally just one large flex cable with tactile switches hidden underneath. So unfortunately, there isn't any safe way of opening this up and cleaning underneath. Now, before we put this thing back together though, I do need to address something, and that is I need to put some grease on this little post here. And the reason why is the way that this stick works is that this post sits in this little channel here, and it basically just moves around like a joystick. So it kind of works similar to how like an arcade stick would work, aside from the fact that this is a pivot rather than a gate. So all we're gonna do is just take a little bit of Shin-Etsu silicone grease and just dab a bit on there. Take the top half of the controller and lock the number pad in place, and just carefully put it back together like so. So now we just gotta put the screws back in place and we're all good to go. Okay, so with the controllers all done, we can now move forward with reassembling the rest of the Colecovision. Now, something of note, if you're doing an RGB mod to a Colecovision from scratch, and you do it this way where you have a separate RGB port while maintaining the RF port, you will need to do some modifications to the top shielding, and that basically involves cutting a bit of the shielding here and folding it over. And as you can see, the previous modder had already taken care of that for me, so no worries there. So we're just going to go ahead and reassemble the internals of the Colecovision here, and then I will move over to the separate location to reassemble the rest. So let's get to it. Actually, real quick, I didn't take into account the fact that we changed how the wires were routed, so we will need to cut a little bit of shielding on the side here, which fortunately, because this is aluminum, you can just come in with a pair of snips and just kind of flex it back and forth. To cut into it. Now, I like to use like some really cheap, crappy snips for this purpose. Just so that way I'm not ruining my nice red ones. Alright, so all that's left to do is to solder this braid onto the top shielding. So let's get to it. Okay, so we're back at the separate set to reassemble the Colecovision, and truth be told, I may end up reinstalling the top shell off camera, and the reason why is because trying to put the top shell back onto the bottom shell is a freaking nightmare, because you have two things that you need to pay attention to. One, you have this little peg here that needs to slip into this little channel here, and two, you have the front bezel that needs to clip over this groove here. So it is not an easy task to do this one-handed or really on camera when you also need to like kind of fandangle it in order to even clip back on. And as well, this expansion door here likes to pop off. So now I need to put that back on, but needless to say, I'm gonna try my best, but worst case scenario, you may end up just seeing me put the 8 bottom screws back on. So let's see what we can do. Alright, and with that, the Colecovision's all done. We cleaned up the controllers, we recapped the whole system, and more importantly, we removed the old RGB mod and replaced it with a more modern solution that really brings out the best out of the Colecovision. And yeah, with that, that's really it. I'd like to thank Mark Duddleson from My Life in Gaming for sending me this unit to take a look at and make a video out of. And yeah, I'd like to also thank you for watching. If you liked what you saw, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, until the blue moon rises, I'll see you next time.